What I have here in my hands is incredibly important. This is something that we all need to understand. Everybody. This affects everyone in the entire world. So don't go away. Let's cut to the chase. What we have here is a very important document. This was written by Li Guangman. He is a former editor at a state-run publication in China. But what's more important is where it has been posted and, of course, the contents of this document. First of all, the title of this document is Meigeren Dongngan. I'm not going to sit here and one by one translate it for you. It just means everybody can feel a profound change is coming. Now, where has this been posted? Because this is very important. It has been posted on Xinhua News, which is the official news outlet for the Chinese Communist Party. It is the top most important news outlet of state media in China. It's top tier. It has also been published in the People's Daily newspaper, which goes around the entire country. Everybody reads it. It's almost like mandatory reading in a way. It's everywhere. Everybody has read this document. Everyone in China has read this document. Okay? Now, you have to understand that unlike CNN or, I don't know, Wall Street Journal or whatever, which are private enterprises with their own political leanings and biases and backing, sure, they are, at the end of the day, still, can be considered an opinion. It's a journalist writes something that's an opinion, which is then part of the Wall Street Journal or CNN. It could be a left-leaning opinion, a right-leaning opinion, whatever it is. This is something that has been condoned by the Chinese Communist Party and has been boosted out by the Chinese Communist Party, because you do not allow anything in the Chinese news unless it is condoned by the state. So bear that in mind when we go through what this document says. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start by reading the conclusion of this particular document. I'm calling it a document. It's an article. Some people might try to call it an opinion piece, but it's not an opinion piece, because if it's published out there by the Chinese government in the People's Daily and on Xinhua News, it is something that the Chinese government wants everybody to read and everybody to absorb. All right? So I'm going to read the conclusion of it before we actually get into the meat of what this thing says. So here's the conclusion. China is currently facing an increasingly severe and complex international environment. The United States is implementing increasingly severe military threats, economic and technological blockades, financial strikes, political and diplomatic seizures against China, and is launching biological warfare. Biological warfare, I guess he's referring to COVID, because now they've convinced everyone that COVID came from Fort Detrick in the USA. Why else would he say launching biological warfare against China? Is the US launching biological warfare against China? Obviously not. But guess what? Everybody in China who's read the People's Daily, everyone in China who's gone to the front page of Xinhua News and read this article now thinks, because this has been put out on state media, the biggest, most profound state media at the top, that yes, this is just true. The US is launching biological warfare against China. So, the US is launching biological warfare, cyber warfare, and public opinion warfare against China. All right? Interesting that, huh? Remember that this is akin to a State of the Union address. I can't stress enough to you just how much an article like this supersedes anything that you're used to reading in the West. This is not the New York Times or a Wall Street Journal article. This is out of the party's mouthpiece state media. It's there for everyone to read. And when you read something that comes in the People's Daily or comes on Xinhua News, you take it as gospel and you take it as fact. Anyway, let's get back into what the rest of this crappy conclusion says. Okay, so we got to the part where they're doing opinion warfare, biological warfare, etc., etc. Wars and space wars have increasingly launched a color revolution against China through the fifth column within China. Obviously, what they're doing is they're talking about Hong Kong here and the pro-democracy protests. Whatever. If at this time we have to rely on those big capitalists as the main force of anti-imperialism and anti-hegemonism and are still catering to the American strategy so that our young generation loses their strong and masculine vibes, then we don't need enemies to fight. We've already fallen, just like the Soviet Union back then, letting the country collapse, letting the country's wealth be looted, and letting the people fall into serious disaster. Therefore, the profound changes currently taking place in China are precisely in response to the current severe and complicated international situation, precisely in response to the barbaric and ferocious attacks that the United States has begun to launch against China. So, yeah, America is apparently launching barbaric attacks. Come on, guys. Barbaric and ferocious attacks against China. The United States is launching that. Okay. Now, this whole article, by the way, this Chinese state document, I'm going to call it now, CCP condoned state document that has been now released to all of the public in China. Remember, everybody's read this. Nobody doesn't read the People's Daily. If you ever lived in China, you'll know that's what all the older generation do. If not reading, the younger generation will read news online, but the older generation pick up their People's Daily every day and they sit and they read it. And my father-in-law reads it, all of my Chinese friends, parents read it, everybody's reading this article. So if you think this is just a little something that, an opinion piece that's in a newspaper somewhere, no. This is something that everybody in the country reads. The vast majority of people have read this, okay? The vast majority of the people now take that the United States is launching biological warfare, ferocious and barbaric attacks against China, and so China needs to prepare. So now we can actually get into the meat of the article, which just explains how all these changes that Xi Jinping has put into place are good, and why they are going to prepare China for a war against America. Because that's what this is. I think everybody can read between the lines here. This is basically one big pile of shit that's blaming America and the Western world for all the problems in China and all of the big missteps made by the government right now that's causing a lot of turmoil in China, especially when it comes to people's money and wealth. They're explaining it away and saying it's a good thing because that's going to prepare us for war against America and the world. Now, when it comes to things like this, you can read opinion pieces on, this sort of document anywhere. I'm calling it a document instead of an article because, like I said, if you got a press release from the White House, because remember, Xinhua and People's Daily is the state mouthpiece. It's not a private thing, so it's coming directly from the state. If you got an opinion piece like this released by, I don't know, pick anyone you like, any politician that you like, any well-known person that you like, if they go out there and they release this and it's blasted out in a State of the Union address or, from the White House directly, you can call it a freaking document. This is what China's thinking right now. This is what China wants all, and I say China, I mean the CCP, wants all of the citizens of China to believe. So I go straight to the source. I've put a link to the article in the description. You can go read it yourself. If you can't read Chinese, pump it through Google Translate. You'll still get the gist. But it goes on in the beginning about how the entertainment industry has become kind of debaucherous, etc., and that right now the clampdown is justified on the entertainment industry. If you've been keeping track of China right now, if you've been watching our podcast, you'll know that big-name celebrities have been basically silenced. They've been erased from their past TV shows for various reasons. There's tax evasion reasons, there's misconduct reasons, according to the Chinese government. There's a lot of different reasons why the entertainment industry has been cracked down on. But the gist of it is that they don't want this Western-style debauchery, this big sort of fan base, this adoration of these celebrities. They don't want that in China. They're trying to get rid of that side of things. And so you can go read about it. So it starts out by basically saying how they are taking care of these celebrities because they are misbehaving and evading tax and whatever other reasons. The next section then goes ahead to attack capitalism, okay? And it's there to attack, these big enterprises in China, which I'm sure if you're in finance or if you've had playing in the stock market or whatever, you'll know about all the crap that's been happening with Chinese tech companies in particular. Alibaba's Ant IPO got shut down before it could even start to fly. Jack Ma, the owner of Alibaba and the IP thieves, has disappeared and is now no longer in the limelight. He's been quashed and taken out, along with a lot of other Chinese billionaires have been silenced. or being taken care of. And a lot of big companies like Didi, you saw what happened with Didi, tried to list in the American Stock Exchange. They did list on the American Stock Exchange, and then suddenly China pulled a big number on them and removed their apps from the store, and the stock fell and all that sort of thing. If you've been keeping in touch, you'll understand what this next section is all about. The next section talks about not only Didi, but Alibaba, and also China's new sort of anti-monopoly law. And they also mention that this all happened around the time of the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And they say that the solemn anniversary. And it's all tied into that, guys, because look what it says here next. It says, the series of rectification actions by the People's Republic of China are telling us that China is undergoing major changes. From the economic, financial, cultural, and political fields to a profound change, or a profound revolution. This is important wording, guys. This can be seen as the beginning. Well, we've seen it for a while now, but this is now in black and white on Chinese state media saying that the Cultural Revolution 2.0 has begun. If you don't know what the Cultural Revolution is, I call it the Cultural Devolution. It's what destroyed China. Its cultural devolution and the Great Leap Backwards is what really ruined China under Mao Zedong, where China's culture was destroyed. China closed up. Millions upon millions of Chinese people starved to death. Horrible things happened during that time. And now we're seeing 2.0. It's something that I've been predicting for a very long time would happen. I didn't realize that it would start happening and being acknowledged so soon. Anyway, let's continue. Okay, so after revolution, this is a return from the capital group to the people. And this is a transformation from capital-centered to people-centered. Therefore, this is a political change, and the people are becoming the main body of this change again. And all those who block this people-centered change will be discarded. Of course, what he's doing is he's talking about, Jack Ma and the other billionaires and anyone who's kind of drunk on the idea of Western capitalism. You will be discarded if you get in the way of this people-orientated revolution that they're talking about here. See? Now they're making enemies out of capitalism here, making enemies out of the idea of capitalism, and saying that it has to go back to people-orientated rather than capitalism-orientated or capital-orientated. This is the wording coming out of the government here, guys. This is what everyone's reading in China. This profound change is also a return to the original intention of the Chinese Communist Party, a return to the people-centered nature, and a return to the essence of socialism. Yes, the essence of socialism. I'm so freaking glad that we're going to return to the essence of socialism in China, which never ever worked. The reason why China is so successful today is because they embraced capitalism. They did. They opened up. China was stagnant, a poor country. Everybody was suffering. It was never a paradise. It was never good. This whole idea of the Chinese Communist Party's people-orientated socialism, whatever you want to call it just didn't work. That's why they had to open up to the West in 1979, and they opened Shenzhen, the special economic zone under Deng Xiaoping. Capital flew into the country. Factories were built. All the Western money coming in, all the investments that allowed the factories to build everything for the rest of the world. That is what lifted China out of poverty, not the Communist Party. The Communist Party and its socialism crap and all of that just plunged the country into massive amounts of poverty and death and starvation. It did not fix anything. But here, what we're seeing is they want to now return. They want to return to the core idea of the Chinese Communist Party, which is to hate capitalism, hate the West, and try to do its failed experiment all over again. Now, this paragraph that I'm about to read next, this is an important one. All right, you ready for this? Let's hit it. This change will wash away all the dirt. The capitalist market will no longer become a paradise for capitalists to get rich overnight. The cultural market will no longer be a paradise for nymphomaniac stars, and news and public opinion will no longer be a position for worshipping Western culture. Just gonna, if you can let that sit in for a minute, okay? See how they're demonizing Western culture, demonizing the idea of the entertainment industry and demonizing capitalism, all in the first bloody sentence there. Let's continue. The return of red, the return of heroes, and the return of blood. Therefore, we need to control all cultural chaos and build a lively, healthy, masculine, strong, and people-orientated culture. We need to crack down on the chaos of big capital manipulation, platform monopoly, and bad money driving out good money in the capital market. We need to guide the flow of funds to entity enterprises, to high-tech enterprises, and to the manufacturing industry. The next part, he's talking about the chaos in the education industry and how it has to basically be reformed so that it's fair for the people. That's why we're seeing all the training centers being shut down, apps like Duolingo, other English learning apps being shut down. You know, it's not being shut down out of fairness, okay, for parents when it comes to their teaching their children, because parents want their children to learn. It's their own choice. It's being shut down because they don't want Western influence to creep in through the English language, which is something that has been happening for years and years, because when you learn English, you tend to learn Western culture at the same time. It's just like if you learn Japanese, you're probably apt to watching Japanese TV shows and learning about Japanese food and habits and things. It's the same thing when you learn Chinese as well. Anyone who's learned Chinese, you learn Chinese poems. You learn, about ancient China, history, things like that. And the same thing goes with English. When you learn English, you learn about the culture. You get some of the influence. And the Chinese Communist Party is deadly afraid of this. The next section that they talk about is more or less the housing industry. So he says we need to control high housing prices and high medical expenses and completely level the three mountains of education, medical care, and housing. So these are the three mountains, which absolutely in China are an issue. Number one, housing is ridiculous. It's more expensive to buy a tiny apartment in Shenzhen than it is to buy a villa on the beach in most countries. Number two, the medical side of things. It's not that expensive in China, okay? Medical costs are fairly low. Of course, not in proportion to people's earnings, bear in mind. If you have a serious medical condition and you need surgery or something, it is incredibly expensive in China. But just the average thing, you go to see a doctor, get some medicine for the flu or whatever, that's cheap as anything in China. But it's not very good. That's the thing. So that needs to be improved. So yeah, we've got the three mountains of education. Education, housing, and medical. Those three things, which they have to now knock down. And I guess they're going to knock it down by, kicking out Western ideology. I don't really quite understand. But they want to make it a people-orientated thing, which, come on, guys. China already is people-orientated. I'm not going to get into that. Let's move on. Although we are not trying to kill the rich and help the poor, we need to effectively solve the problem of increasing income gap between the rich and the poor. Common prosperity is to allow ordinary workers to get more income in the distribution of social wealth. I mean, yes, China has one of the biggest wealth gaps I've ever witnessed in the world. And I come from South Africa, where there's a massive wealth gap between the poor and the rich. It's more so in China. The wealthy, especially the furodais, will flaunt their Ferraris and their Gucci bags and drive around when you've got literally people without shoes on the side of the road who cannot afford, anything other than the very basic necessities in life, if that. The wealth gap is big, so what they're trying to do is, address that wealth gap. But what they don't understand is that this idea of what they're trying to do is not going to work in China. It just won't work. Anyone who knows China knows that this kind of thing isn't going to work at the end of the day. All right, it continues to say that the current efforts to rectify the entertainment, art, and film and television circles are far from enough. We must use all means to combat the various star-chasing and fan-chasing phenomena that exists in current society. Completely put an end to the phenomenon of nymphomaniacs and Xiaoxian Rou, little fresh meat, which I got to explain that one to you. Little fresh meat is what people refer to those kind of very feminine male stars in China. You know the ones I'm talking about. Very, very white skin, very delicate features. Very prissy, old. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Kind of like Korean boy bands, right? in China, they call them Shaoxian Rou, little fresh meat. So whoever's writing this is such a freaking boomer piece of shit. Sorry to use that phrase here, but like he's totally against the idea of nymphomaniacs. He obviously hates the idea of women in entertainment who get a lot of attention. And he hates the idea of these little sissy girly boys. And so he says we must use all different powers to strike these people down, basically. That's what this is saying. It's ridiculous. Anyway, let me continue. So they want to get rid of this whole fan clout chasing thing. Doesn't want people to worship nymphomaniacs and little fresh meats in social society. So he doesn't want, like, young people or to aspire to be any of these kind of celebrities, really. That's the gist of it, right? Completely and truly let the entertainment, art and film and television circles be upright and upstanding. In other words, boring and sterile and only in service of the party. This last bit is, again, quite worrying, because this is basically just cultural revolution stuff. He says, laborers and ordinary people will become the protagonists and masters of literature and art. So it will be the ordinary man who's going to be the protagonist, I guess, the stars. You see, this is all that old Marxist garbage rhetoric that they've done in the past. Now, like I said, you can go read the full article. There's more to it. I could go through it word by word, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to stress once more is that while here in the Western world we are, walking on eggshells, worried about being called a racist because we say that the virus came from Wuhan, where it really did, China is putting out things like this that are calling us the enemy, that are saying that we are not only conducting biological and cyber attack warfare against China and the Chinese people, but we are an enemy of the Chinese people. And Western values and ideas are an enemy of the Chinese people. And here we sit, worried that we're going to be called a racist because we say factual statements. It has made us, as a society in the West, incredibly weak and easy pickings for a very strong, steadfast government like the CCP, who allows opinions like this to go out in the biggest state media, to everyone, consumed by everyone, and they encourage people to consume this because that is their end goal. If you hadn't noticed, it is what's being said in this particular document is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing with all these changes, cracking down on the entertainment industry, cracking down on the tech industry and on business. Capitalist, billionaires and that are all fleeing, or they've been locked up, or what have you. The educational system, where they've banned all foreign textbooks and are now banning for-profit training centers and even language exchange apps. This right here is factual. It's not an opinion. So what are we doing, rest of the world? What are we doing when we allow China to badmouth us all like this to our face, to 1.4 billion Chinese people? What are we doing? We show them nothing but respect. We worry about hurting their feelings, hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. It's about time that this stops. It's about time that we face this kind of insult head on, and we reply to things like this. Not at all directing any of our negative energy or grievances towards Chinese people, but to the government that allows this sort of rhetoric to be blasted out. Maybe it is time for the rest of the world to wake up. Take this and give a proper reply to the CCP. Until next time, guys, unlike this backwards garbage, which, by the way, this is going to result in nothing but pain and agony for the Chinese people and the rest of the world. Unlike the CCP, stay awesome.